Okay, welcome everyone to a event on cities and climate and just transitions, especially in cities. We have collected a great lineup of speakers really to talk about how we can connect research on the global level on climate and climate scenarios with the implementation in cities, because that's in the end where a lot of the action is and where things really need to happen. So we will have two keynote presentations to start you off, and then we continue with a panel. And let me, without much further ado, actually start with the introduction of our first keynote speaker, that is Sir Kilkis. She is Vice Chair of the Working Group 3 of the IPCC, deeply involved with the cities assessment report that is going to be written by the IPCC, and an expert in the field of cities and climate change. So, Sir, kick us off.
It's a pleasure to be in this session on reimagining urban and global futures. There's a lot to share, and let me start by sharing the key findings from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, on urban areas that can be summarized into three main points. So the first point is the urban share of global emissions. The second is the promising mitigation options in urban systems. And the third is their linkages with the Sustainable Development Goals. So if we start with the first point, the urban share of global emissions, urban areas were responsible for 29 gigatons CO2 equivalent of consumption-based emissions in 2020. And when we look at the amount, this corresponds to about 67 to 72% of global CO2 and methane emissions, excluding aviation, shipping, and other biogenic source of emissions. With only moderate mitigation effort, urban areas can be responsible for about 34 gigatons CO2 equivalent in 2050, and up to 40 gigatons CO2 equivalent with low mitigation efforts. So it really depends on the actions that urban areas are taking. And at the same time, we recognize that if urban areas do take the actions, they can create opportunities to increase resource efficiency and significantly reduce global greenhouse gas emissions through the systemic transition of infrastructure in urban form in low development pathways towards net zero emissions. So with these opportunities, it is only with ambitious and immediate mitigation efforts, including high levels of electrification and enhanced energy and material efficiency, that urban areas will be able to limit urban emissions to less than 3 gigaton CO2 equivalent in 2050. On the point relating to the promising mitigation options in urban systems, ambitious mitigation efforts for established, rapidly growing, and emerging cities will encompass three broad strategy areas. This is reducing energy and material use, including through compact form and supporting infrastructure, electrification in combination with switching to low-carbon energy sources, and enhancing carbon uptake and storage in the urban natural environment. It is the integration of all of these broad strategy areas that makes urban mitigation effective. And for example, urban form can be either compact and walkable or dispersed and autocentric. When urban form is compact and walkable, there are many co-benefits, such as co-location of jobs and housing, health, lower resource use, and saving land for agriculture, forestry, and other land use. And each urban area is also a system bringing together land use, transport, buildings, and energy. What is done in one layer impacts the other. And when we improve, for example, one layer, we can provide additional entry points for enabling co-location, providing accessibility to public transport and choices for active mobility. For this reason, urban areas are systems where multiple mitigation options, especially when integrated, have positive cascading effects across transport, energy, buildings, land use, and behavior. Better urban planning can also reduce energy use in 2050 by about 20-25% while providing better service provisioning. Electrification of energy end uses in cities also has a very important mitigation potential, and carbonizing the energy supply is also bringing the potential to about 75% of the total. And the full potential for reducing consumption-based emissions to net zero greenhouse gas emissions can also be realized when emissions beyond cities' administrative boundaries are also addressed. Let's come to the third point, the linkages of the urban mitigation options with Sustainable Development Goals. When we assessed, when the IPCC report provided the assessment, the urban mitigation options have many synergy potentials with the SDGs. And for example, measures promoting walkable and urban form combined with electrification and renewable energy can create health co-benefits from cleaner air and benefits from enhanced mobility. When we look at about 150 signatories in a Climate City network, about 68,500 years of human life were saved due to better air quality. When we look at urban green and blue infrastructure, this can provide co-benefits for increasing permeable surfaces to support absorbing water and reduce flood risks to a certain extent. Case studies have also proven effective in allowing cities to learn from one another towards integrated policy making for sector transitions, including coordination mechanism, electromobility, and service provisioning examples, among others. These have also supported learning from enablers and barriers, and ways of imagining urban areas in decarbonized and climate-neutral resilient futures. A cross-working group collaboration also looked into cities and showing that diversity of cities' experiences in mitigation adaptation provides an advantage for those governments that are willing to learn together. And in an outlook for the future, when we look at the opportunities for the IPCC Special Report on Climate Change in Cities that will be coming in the 7 assessment cycle we're in, this will navigate in chapters across cities in a changing climate, actions and solutions to reduce risks and emissions, how to facilitate and accelerate change, and provide solutions by city types and regions. From the perspective of urban areas and mitigation of climate change, let me also provide some examples to discuss here. This will include urban emission trends, including consumption-based emissions, the role of cities in emissions and mitigation, future global and city-level scenarios considering local options, equity, sustainable development, infrastructure, and informal settlements, common and context-specific urban mitigation options for spatial planning, energy, covering heating, cooling, and electricity, existing and new buildings and infrastructure, mobility and transport, water, land, food, demand-side measures and behavioral change, and cross-sectoral integrated approaches in urban systems will also be assessed with the most recent scientific findings and the evidence coming from the cities. So will metrics for assessing mitigation adaptation options in the context of sustainable development and the characteristics of and within cities, including service provisioning that delivers health and well-being for all. Holistic planning and systems thinking will also be assessed towards decarbonized and climate-resilient cities, and this is also important for both reimagining and also realizing the cities of tomorrow. This will lead to a synthesis of solution-relevant information and a collection of case studies by city types in the context of urban sustainable development. And in these ways, the special report has the ambition of bringing together academic research, practitioner communities, and opportunities. And in the opening of the high-level segment of the COP29, the chair of the IPCC also emphasized the extremes that we're experiencing due to human-induced climate change, the impacts that we recently saw in Valencia, and all of this underlying the need for swift action. I would like to remind all of this once again to avoid the worst consequences of climate change and encourage the importance of enabling a world where transport is no longer polluting, cities are green, and we have transitioned away from fossil fuels. Muchas gracias. Esto es muy importante para el futuro del mundo. El momento de actuar es ahora.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sia, for those insights. Now I'm going to do something difficult, and that is present, while I also need to time myself that I'm not going to talk for too long. And so I'm going to put a timer here to avoid that I will go over. Because I want to talk a little bit about a study that we did at IASA to assess where the knowledge gaps are basically in cities and what cities can do about climate change. And so this study has been led by my colleagues Leila Niami and Kewan Riai, who did with a lot of global participation, basically researchers from all over the world, and really try to identify by different topics the different, especially the knowledge gaps of what do we not know and what should we study going up to the next assessments. And Sir already spoke a lot about the things that we know and why cities are important, but at the same time, for a lot of these things, we don't have the full evidence yet, or we don't the full understanding yet to really write authoritative assessments. right? And so here, for example, that we have this increase in urbanization. More and more people live in cities. At the same time, developing scenarios for cities is very difficult if you want to do that at these multi-levels, to have information for the cities, information for the country, information for the globe, and some consistency between what happens at these multiple levels. Understanding the typologies of different cities is a new field. There are some typologies out, they're not necessarily compatible with each other. Every city is unique in its own way, but at the same time, cities are also, of course, struggling with the same issues and have commonalities. And so having a way of thinking about that is very important in order to write assessments, in order to actually bring information to policymakers. A key aspect of cities is, especially in the developing world, is the informal settlements. And there, the understanding of what can be done, what are effective policies to go beyond informal settlements and to provide decent housing is also a field that really sort of needs more attention before we can write authoritative messages on it. And then another key reason to look at cities is because climate impacts and vulnerability come so together in a very convoluted way almost, right? The cities provide, at the same time, they are very resilient, but they also, because you have so many people on one location, things can go wrong at a very large scale if they go wrong. And so on the one hand, they are hotspots of what can be done, and at the same time they are hotspots of vulnerability. And that is sort of a very convoluted way of thinking of what the role of cities. And then of course there's issues around air pollution that have co-benefits if we avoid climate change, if we do mitigation. Cities are the hotspots of air pollution, and so if we solve climate, we often also actually really improve on air pollution. And around waste. Not a direct climate issue, often seen or not being a big issue here, but a very important topic where it comes to, for example, flooding and health-related impacts in how cities deal with waste, social aspects around waste, especially waste pickers, people in cities who are really being discriminated against. Also socially, that's a very vulnerable group that really needs to be thought about and taken into account. Now, if we take it to what cities can do, there's many fields. It goes to looking at the energy systems. Cities are sort of the key places where a lot of consumption happens, where a lot of things come together. But at the same time, they consume a lot that's actually produced not in the city but elsewhere. And that means that we need to account basically for on a consumption-based way of accounting, which is not the most common way that we do statistics in the world. And so this is when we really want to say, well, what is the contribution of cities? We also need better statistics and better data to actually be able to better have to show that the role of cities in the global in the system compared to what happens around them. The same happens for food, right? A lot of cities don't produce their own food typically, but they have a large footprint basically on the areas directly surrounding them and elsewhere in the globe. And they can do a lot because cities are often then the places of innovation where lifestyle changes happen, people learn from each other, and actually the behavioral changes go faster, and that have implications elsewhere. Of course, buildings, we already heard some about that, the key role of buildings, and especially in cities that are growing and becoming, and are building a lot of their infrastructure over the next decades. The role of job creation in doing so, but at the same time, understanding what the effective policies are to actually really steer low energy buildings, how we can have effective policies on new materials that can provide the density that we need in cities, but at the same time are low carbon materials. Those are really areas of study that we really need more attention to. Transport, another one of those where we can have good examples, basically from cities, low emission zones, public transport works better in cities. Urban freight is also another frontier of decarbonizing. But at the same time here, good knowledge of how we can change the behavior is, and how we have policies and effective ways of changing people's behavior, how to have shared mobility and avoid that people in cities actually all start owning their own car and are stuck in traffic jams, but really lower their material footprints. Those are really the frontiers of things that we need to learn more about. Again, also here for waste management, for nutrient management, for food, these are issues. I'm going to move to a few enabling conditions, because that's where cities are really the engines. Because that's where I think if we look around us here and we see the countries struggling basically on the country level to come to agreements, we see also at the same time cities actually are the places where things are moving and changes are made. And where lots of innovation is made, and they are really these test beds of innovation, especially where it comes to governance and institutions. Cities are often really experimenting with new ways of how can you bring the people with you in developing climate plans. How can we have new ways of governments, new institutions, and really implement the climate at the speed in climate mitigation and the speed that we need it. And this is where cities should learn a lot from each other, because cities are really the testing ground here, basically. The same around these behavioral changes. We already touched a little bit upon that, where it came on buildings and transport, that cities are the places where behavioral changes are so important that we don't really know the policies that are effective. But this is exactly the area where cities are experimenting, and we should, and they should really learn from each other in what works well and what is probably something to avoid, and not to repeat each other's mistakes. Innovation. And innovation of technologies, of course, a lot of technology innovation in the end happens in cities. Some cities are more successful in creating these vibrant, innovative environments than others. And so what do they better than others, and how can they really be providing the solutions? And then a very big one is on finance. Because on the one hand, a lot of finance actually happens in cities, right? And so also if it's thinking about novel methods to finance implementation and to look at public-private partnerships and to come up with new models for finance, that happens a lot in cities in the end, because those are the small-scale governments that can do that. At the same time, I think the assessments of how much finance is actually needed in cities, they seem to be all over the place, and there's not a good methodology or understanding actually of how cities go about saying what they need. There was an assessment last year that came out basically where it ranges from just, between different cities from a few thousand to going into the millions or billions, depending on the scope that they took into account of what they think is climate related. And then to wrap up, in order not to be killed by my own timer, I think the cities are really, they have lots of synergies, and they are really the place where you can harvest the synergies between mitigation and adaptation. It has to happen well in city side. Don't build a low carbon system that is very vulnerable to the impact of climate change, and really achieve climate with all of the SDGs at the same time, and really harvest the benefits of health and other well-being co-benefits, because those are really essential, and cities are the places where we can easiest basically harvest these co-benefits. So thank you. That's a study that we produced. I will leave some leaflets in case you are interested. I'll leave those here. And then I will invite our full panel here on the podium. So that is Marc Serra, Member of Parliament of Barcelona, yeah. And Ritu Mathur, Director of Energy Modeling and Assessment at TERI in India. Because now okay, I left my paper there, so this is what I did by heart. Correct me if I was wrong. So to start things, Mark Serra, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what's happening on the ground in Barcelona and yeah, to kick us off here.
Okay, thank you, Bas. It's working? Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting us in this interesting panel. Today, also at home in the Spanish pavilion, I want to start with very grateful to the government of Spain for hosting this debate and for the great efforts it's making in the fight against the climate emergency and the green transition in our country. So, as the keynote speaker says, cities are the responsible of the majority of the emissions. But we think that cities also can be one of the main drivers of the green transition. This has been the case in the social, technological revolutions that have taken place in past centuries. And this will happen again with the green transition. But cities alone cannot achieve the goals we need. Cities without legislative frameworks and economic resources clash with opposing coalitions with overly powerful interests that stop the change. In my experience as a councillor of the city of Barcelona last 10 years, I have seen the enormous urban and green transformation of the city, a city with 1.7 million people, with the reappropriation of the city for its citizens, the limitation of traffic to pedestrianize some of its main avenues, as well as the schools, the fight against pollution to improve the air quality, and the promotion of bicycle mobility, the low emission zones that is working in Barcelona, investments in the creation of new green areas, the recovery of our river, the best energy company, or the struggle for public management of the water. All of that are just some of the highlights of these intense years. Unfortunately, most of these measures have come up against lawsuits and obstacles from large business groups or lobbies that oppose these transformations. These attacks have delayed the process and in some cases have even stopped it. That is why today, and in all the forums that we have the opportunity, we insist on the need to generate regulatory frameworks that protect green changes in the cities. As we've seen in this panel, scientific evidence shows us the steps we have to take to adapt and transform our cities to reduce CO2 emissions. And we can't permit politics and legal battles that create more climate action to delay. With respect to the province of Barcelona, in recent years, we have also been able to influence the green transformation of 311 municipalities in our region. With our Renewable 2030 program, we've mobilized more than 200 million for investments in 257 renewable energy projects, which have generated savings of 150 gigawatts-hour and avoided the emission of more than 65 million tons of CO2 in the atmosphere. With these investments, we provide municipalities with energy autonomous. We also provide them, and this is very important, with annual economic benefits, equivalent to 25% of the investments each year, that they will have to reinvest year after year in new environmental policies. This generates like a snowball effect that is very positive for our objectives. On the other hand, this year, we have activated a new plan, the Adapta Clima program, where we finance local investments in climate change adaptation with nearly 20 million euros. We are building shaded spaces in playgrounds or centers for elderly, climate shelters, bioclimatic comfort itineraries, insulation and thermal improvements in public facilities. These are just some briefing, no? Some ideas of the great things that we are doing from the cities in Barcelona, having a very positive impact on the objective of climate neutrality. But as I said in the beginning, we cannot do it alone. European and global governance must put cities in the center, understand that we are the best alliance for citizens to feel the transformations as their own, and that without cities, there are no future. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for those examples of what Barcelona is doing, and it's quite an impressive list. And as you see, indeed, everything comes together in the city, right? Both the mitigation and the impacts, and creating a robust system. Ritu, could you help us to understand a bit what the cities in India are doing about both mitigation and adaptation to climate change?
Does this work already? Yeah. So again, India, I think, is a slightly different country, and in terms of its standing, it's still a developing country with much of its cities yet to develop. And I think, as my predecessor also spoke just now, I think cities can also be seen as an engine of growth. So it's from both sides in terms of the impacts that would happen with increasing urbanization, that we see the impacts of increasing pollution, etc., but also as a necessity to continue with having cities and growth becoming the driver of how we want to see the future. So already about 60% of India's current GDP comes from cities and towns, and with rapid urbanization, we are likely to see more and more people move to these urban centers, near about doubling by 2030. Also, India has very ambitious NDCs already, where it's looking at decreasing its emission intensity from 2005 levels, also looking at increasing the level of renewable energy in the overall share to a great extent, to 45% by 2030. And in all of this, the government has put forward several schemes which are aligned not only at the national level, but also at the city level. So here we have, for example, the Amrut scheme, which is the Atal mission for rejuvenation of and urban transformation. There is the PMAYU, which is the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana urban scheme, which again is about making housing available to people in terms of access to houses for people who are poor. But also at the same time, I think, again, this provides the government with the opportunity to do all this built-up infrastructure in a way which is environmentally friendly, which links with the urban infrastructure. So much of these schemes also align with not just the provisioning of accommodation, but also with looking at sewage systems, the waste generation and handling, the water systems, looking at green spaces in the cities, and so on. So I think it is this interdisciplinarity, the interconnectedness among sectors, etc., which is coming in various ways. Again, if we look at cities, transportation is, again, a big challenge in terms of vehicular congestion, but also environmental pollution. And here, again, the government has a number of schemes towards electrification of vehicles, CNG buses, as well as cars and so on. And here, again, the government has been, from time to time, taking innovative measures in trying to see how it can move faster in moving towards these cleaner vehicle options, in improving the public transportation and so on. So the metro systems in several cities are being developed. At the same time, ways of looking at innovative business models to get the electric buses running, for example, in cities are being looked at. So here again, grand challenge systems have been undertaken, wherein there was initially some hesitation in terms of whether people would come forth to put forth electric vehicles when the charging infrastructure is not up to speed, or where should how much infrastructure there should be for charging. So there are several kind of chicken and egg kind of problems which again needed to be undertaken. And here innovations like the Grand Challenge scheme again helped in bringing together the manufacturers, the people who were running the buses, the people who were setting up the infrastructure all together to find combined solutions such that this became workable. And over different rounds of those grand challenges, we saw progress in the cities in terms of making this more and more amenable. Again, in terms of electrification of vehicles, the government took steps in terms of electrifying the government vehicle fleets. So again, sort of starting with the easy to do things in terms of where you could put the infrastructure, and also then showcasing how things can be done to others so that it ramps up. The other part which I also wanted to bring in is about the other aspect of vulnerability. And India again ranks pretty high in terms of vulnerability in terms of the Global Climate Risk Index. We have a lot of coastal cities which might be affected with sea level rise. We have vulnerabilities because of tropical cyclone disturbances. And again, early warning systems are something which the government has worked on in terms of intensifying in the last few years. We've seen the price in the pudding there, and again, when we had cyclones earlier in Odisha, we lost a lot of lives and settlements, but with early warning systems now, we were able to evacuate more people and save more lives with the more recent cyclones. So I think there's progress, there's learning, there are a whole variety of ways in which this is getting done, and there's a lot which can be learned from among success stories at various city levels in terms of how people are looking at energy, buildings, transport, resilience, and the entire ecosystem of greening the cities. So at this moment, I'll stop with that and come back later.
Yeah, thank you for those two setting the scene of how Barcelona and India deal with these struggles these topics that we've all brought up. I wonder for a first reflection from your side, actually, how you perceive this relationship between what happens on the urban level in the cities and global policies, and the same actually for knowledge and have you used when do you see used when cities develop their plans information that comes from the global level to the city, and is that global information in a useful way, or are you actually on the city level more struggling with it, and is it not what you need? Sia, would you want to first go about this?
Thank you very much for all of the very valuable views. I would like to also connect this with what we're hearing now in the COP29. So there's the ministerial meeting on urbanization and climate change taking place, and we heard very good calls for having cities on board and supporting governments to reach and support their net zero targets. More multi-level governance, the initiatives, boosting prosperity, moving away from fossil fuels, providing a more safer path, powering cities, having urban planners on board, new solutions serving for pedestrians, and also many more, having the risk assessments support the cities for livable and sustainable futures while providing affordable housing, and the need to just provide more urban action in a time when climate change is intensifying in mitigating the emissions that cause the global warming. So I would just also like to provide this in context, because what makes cities aware of what is happening in terms of climate change is coming from the global level. So we're looking into that information, and I do see a lot of cities using trends and pathways, trying to align their pathways towards 1.5 degree Celsius aligned pathways. So that type of alignment is possible because we have the global information and we also have the local information. So I think cities are using that type of alignment to move forward. I would also like to provide some additional examples from Spain, because we're in the hosted by Spain here today. So the government of Spain and the city councils, including Barcelona, Madrid, Sevilla, and Valencia, they signed the Declaration on Climate Neutral Cities, and many more cities have joined the process. Now there's also a national collaboration platform of Spanish cities for climate neutrality, with the motivation that it is essential to learn from each other if we want to go far and go fast. And I had the pleasure of also reading some of the climate city contracts that were prepared for the mission cities across Europe. And these do include very good, promising examples from Spain. Looking at some of the promising elements, the climate city of contract, because Barcelona is already shared, it includes points of emphasis on urban design and proximity planning, improving living conditions, even promoting educational centers and zero-emission university campuses, low emission zones again, more sustainable lifestyles, a culture for the citizens of the future, and even many more, attracting talent to support sustainable cities, urban development with an electrified energy model, renewable energies as vectors towards decarbonization, and bringing nature closer to citizens. It also has an avoid, change, improve approach that takes in the strategy and requires working collaboratively with multiple stakeholders. It takes an alignment. It takes realizing what are the needs of the city and trying to align that with 1.5 degrees Celsius pathways. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark, can I ask you to reflect on using global information and how global and cities relate to each other?
Thank you. Yeah, about this relationship between the urban innovation and the global policies, no? As my predecessor said, we think that cities are the perfect test ground for urban innovation, and also is the better way to show to the higher levels of administration how innovation policies could work if they reach the needed funding. That's important. We've started lots of programs, different initiatives and projects in the local or regional level, basically founded in the personal determination of politicians and technicians, small groups, and with the own funding, no, of these local administrations. For the reason, I think we need to give cities a chance to plan, design, and deploy their own adaptation and urban innovation policies, offering a favorable framework, regulatory framework, and a better finance. That's very important. And maybe I can put two different examples of these initiatives that finally where the higher levels, no, can adapt. Two different examples. The first example is a local innovation policy that achieves state recognition and funding. Is the public bike sharing system in Barcelona. It starts a lot of years ago, at 2007, as a local initiative with own local funding, and it reached in just some years 190,000 users in the city, in a city of 1.7 million people. And this year, after 17 years working and being a successful initiative, the state recognized and funding this initiative with more than 5 million euros. That it's very important, no, to be more accessible this initiative. And the other example is a most recent example. With the green transformation, it's about the green transformation of the urban highways of Barcelona, the superblocks, we called it superblocks, putting people at the center. And it consists to build pedestrian zones and green areas to improve the air quality, but also the community building and change the mobility system of our cities. It was an important investment project with a lot of money. Now it has the recognized of academy, part of the academy, and different international awards. And we are convinced that sooner than later it will be adopted like a structural policy in the higher levels, maybe to develop the green infrastructure strategies and plans, no, that we are working. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, and also for giving those examples that indeed other cities could look at to see whether they can take that also up in their plans. Yeah, Ritu, to what extent do you see in India cities using global information?
So again, I think there's movement in terms of the action which needs to happen on ground. And one of the key things which I see as the biggest improvement is the improvement in the data at the localized level. So at the state level and district level, the government's very rapidly now improving the localized data, which makes people understand the situation they are in, also helps them to index where they could be, and they could also see how they rank with regard to other players who are similar to them. So I think that gap getting filled quickly at the state level and the city level would be something which is extremely important. Having said that, again, going back to the climate smart cities assessment framework, which is again something which was developed for the 100 smart cities in India. This again has been devised to look at a holistic climate responsive development framework. And again, it's important because this is able to change the mindset while planning the development to tackle the various parameters which need to be handled, whether it's air quality or other things. And cities can get to view their scores, they can look at their performance report, they can look at the recommendations of what should be done, etc. So again, the improvement can be tracked on the SmartNet kind of portals. So these are the kind of things which I think are happening with regard to the ability of tracking data and better availability of data. And on the side of the overall global perspective, I would say downscaled data in terms of how the climate science zeroes in on vulnerability of different regions and districts in particular is something which is again being done. So looking scientifically in terms of what is required, and at the same time building on ground and strengthening the local data for action together, I think is moving us in a good stead.
Yeah, I was wondering whether, in case you wanted to mention any examples actually of how that of that connection between global and national, then Sir, go ahead with that as well. But my and so you can, yeah. Do you want to share those?
Yes, of course. So it's the global models that are showing us the timing of net zero, the timing of different sectors, and that is coming information from the global information and the scenarios. And I also want to provide an example from Turkey, my country that is taking action in this regard. So also similar to the mission cities in Europe, the first city that has prepared the climate neutrality action plan is coming from Izmir. It's the first city from an associated country to receive a mission label, and it just received that this year. Some of the expected early changes, including increasing the renewable energy share, energy efficiency measures, behavioral change, reduction in energy bills, creation of new jobs, new skills, and clean energy workforce. There's also a very green way for public trams in the city to enhance the public transportation. And surrounding the city, you can already see many, many wind turbines producing clean energy and working in harmony with the environment. So it's also a very important renewable energy hub, a wind energy hub for my country. So all of that alignment, again, I want to emphasize that, but also what the measures, what are the potential of the measures? So it's a combination of using that data and combine it with the needs and possibilities in that urban space. I also want to, I had the pleasure of reading also Mumbai Climate Action Plan. It's the Climate Action Plan towards a climate resilient Mumbai, and I saw very promising examples. It became India's first climate action plan to set net zero targets for 2050. It includes sectoral priorities, energy and buildings, sustainable mobility, sustainable waste management, urban greening and biodiversity, air quality, as well as urban flooding were mentioned here. And it has the, in terms of, again, the mitigation potential. So yes, electrification is one of the broad categories, but Mumbai directly said, my city's electricity mix presents the biggest mitigation opportunity for tapping into decentralized renewable energy and the opportunity of electrification to avoid carbon lock-in. And also, this was very promising. I also read that only 22% were currently walkable. So Mumbai directly measured this, used the data, and reported that, and they want to improve. So all of this is very promising on my end. Mumbai is also recognized as one of the 3 cities of the world trying to protect all the carbon sinks. So in this sense, I see a lot of promising action, these test beds for taking the action. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And I could listen to these examples, I think, all day, because I think it relates to my point. Like, do cities actually learn enough from each other? And do decision makers at other levels and the global policies, the things that are going on here, do we learn enough from what actually is happening in cities? Do we have the platforms or institutions in place to do that learning, or do we need to invent those? And so if you have reflections or thoughts about that I think will be a really interesting way to go further. If you have, then
yeah, very briefing, but I think that there are a lot of different institutions and networks to share this experience, no, and to learn. Most of the initiatives in Barcelona and in our province, we learn from other cities, no, and I think that this is not a problem. Almost in Europe or in Spain. Maybe it's, as I told before, maybe cities and big metropolitan cities not, but medium and little municipalities have a problem of funding these initiatives, no? But I think that the ideas, they have the ideas, they have the policies, and it's a problem of funding, yeah.
Thank you. Ritu, what is your thoughts about how you see cities learning from each other? And
yeah, so again, I think having these portals is a good way of having networks where everybody can sort of see the data, track the data, look at indicators and the movement. But I think the other big thing which has come together in the recent years is the coming together of scientific understanding along with the town planning, city planning kind of departments, as also the multidisciplinarity which comes in with regard to the technologies when it comes to, say, building materials, handling waste technologies, or looking at how electrification and greening of the grid can help, how you can look at decentralized systems, and how you can look at integrations between different kinds of sectors when you're looking at the whole ecosystem of the city. So I think that is the important move forward which again, I think through the networks which are working at the city level are able to bring in, which was earlier siloed even through the government departments, and is seeing a much more intermingling and a lot more interlinkage with each other now, and especially while designing the net zero roadmaps, because that's something you cannot do with regard to one sector. You need to start looking at the holistic roadmap for the entire city in terms of how you green your electricity, how you green your end-use demands in the entire supply chains, and how you bring in circularity into the entire system. So I think all of that is also going a long way in terms of bringing this together as networks of people.
Thank you. Then I want to take the one to you, Sir. What you see on the learning front between cities, whether it's enough, whether we need other ways of thinking about this, or whether it's.
So I think reimagining and realizing the urban and global is already taking place. Cities are learning from one another, but data portals will definitely be a big step. City guides are being launched to provide and support the urban planning that is taking place, how to increase proximity planning, how to increase 15-minute city type of approaches, how to address urban risks or informal settlements and climate risks at the same time while improving the mitigation and the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. So it really requires the coordination integrated, as my colleague Ritu also mentioned, and also the finance that Mark mentioned for that context. So it really requires an integrated perspective. And learning will never stop. It will just continue, because as cities experiment, so will there be new ideas, new business models, new government initiatives supporting peer-to-peer trading, and all of the new emerging business models out there. So learning is a continuous process, and cities will continue to learn, but we can support this. So our assessment in the IPCC Special Report on Climate Change in Cities, we really want to push the action out there to be visible and allow more cities to learn from one another. And I do hope that these type of data platforms are also widely available to many more cities, so it can be possible to compare and track the progress. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to actually look at the audience on whether someone following this discussion here had some thoughts of their own and would want to ask something to the panelists that we have collected here. Microphone is coming there.
Thank you. I hope that I'm audible. Yeah. Thank you for this nice panel discussion. Just one query is that when I talk about cities, also need to think of in terms of integration between cities and villages or rural areas. Otherwise, some of the spillover effects that is happening in cities could possibly be experienced by the rural areas. Are you also thinking on those lines? What are the reflections on those lines? Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And let me see if there's more question. But if not, then maybe indeed, if you can reflect on how the relation between the city and the surroundings, whether the city is not actually trading off towards the surroundings, some of this, and whether you see that happening in the plans or not, or whether you see vulnerabilities there of that risk. So maybe we go here.
Yes, so about 2 weeks ago now, I was in Antalya, and a lot of the farmers surrounding the city are experiencing the impacts of climate change, heat stress in their crops. And it is pushing a little bit, actually, the rural to urban migration even more. So my point in that session was, for sustainable cities, we also need to think about sustainable rural areas and how to have urban, developing sustainably, but at the same time allowing the farmers to sustain their livelihoods, regenerative farming, and possibly having this more balance between urban and rural areas. When we look at urban and rural emission footprints, it really depends on the region. So in some regions, urban footprints per capita are lower than rural urban areas, rural footprints. But in some other regions, the rural per capita emissions are higher than urban. So it's not across the board the same. It changes by region. But for a sustainable future and also reimagining, we also need to think about sustaining the livelihoods in the rural areas for sustainable cities, because then more buildings, more roads. We need to think both in a balanced way. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark.
Yes, I can talk our experience in our region in Spain, in the province of Barcelona. We are 311 municipalities, more or less half are in rural areas, no, or less than 10,000 people living there. So we work a lot in this medium level administration, that is the regional level, to help them to plan, and most of them, maybe the 90%, has their own climate and energy plans. But another time, for these municipalities of 5,000, no, 1,500 people living there, they have big problems to make the investments that are planning. No? So I think that it's very important, these medium-level administrations, no, like Diputació de Barcelona, to help them to plan and to invest. Because these territories are territories of innovation too. For example, in our region, in energy issue, where we have the best innovation initiatives in energy communities, for example, is in the rural areas. So I think that we can learn a lot about this experience with the powerful of the communities, but they need more support.
Thank you. And then Rita, I think in India this problem is of a different order almost. So.
Yeah, so again, I think the differences in India are between different countries, but at the same time also it's not that every urban center is of the same kind as well. I think when we are doing city level planning, it's also the metropolitan cities or the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 cities have very different sizes, scales, issues itself, and could be very different and closer to some of the problems sometimes in the villages itself. But having said that, therefore the learning across different scales and sizes does matter. But if we look at, for example, say renewable electrification, in case of villages, looking at decentralized or mini grids and seeing how that can work for farmers may be a very different kind of a solution as compared to what you might need to do in case of cities, where you're looking at how to increase strengthening the grid, but also looking at maybe solar rooftops and increasing that at the other end. So I think it's like a no one size fits all. You need to look at what works in what kind of situation and what kind of setting. So I think a lot of localized information, a lot of including the people, and I think that's something we've not talked about too much as of now, bringing people at the center and understanding the problem of the citizens, the problem of the people living in those local areas is very important. And just to end that, again, I think there's a program which is called the Aspirational Districts Program of the government, which looks at every district and trying to see what is it that needs to be done in that particular district. What would push the growth there, what would be meaningful in terms of livelihood opportunities there, and therefore when we are looking at the whole prospect of moving forward with our SDGs and our overall economic growth, how do we leverage everything that we need to do in terms of multiple options differently between villages, cities, and so on.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And that, I think, also brings us also to the end of our session. So I want to thank our three great panelists here for their reflections on the role of cities in... And then if you're interested in the study that I talked about, there are some QR codes here that bring you directly to the study. Thanks.